Wall Street runs on optimism. In the last few months, the markets have climbed higher and higher, fueled by this belief that AI will usher in a new golden age. Now, I don't know whether that's going to happen or not, but what I do know is that optimism can be a drug, even a dangerous drug. It can make us ignore warning signs about how things could get far worse. Andrew Ross Sorkin is one of the most influential voices in finance. He's interviewed nearly every important figure in the world of business. And for the past few years, he's been obsessed with one moment in history where he thinks that kind of optimism tanked the economy. And he thinks it holds lessons for us all today. His new book is 1929, Inside the Greatest Crash in Wall Street History and How It Shattered a Nation. You spent an awful long time writing this. 8 years.
Yeah, it took a long time. It was not, I did not imagine that was what was going to happen.
Was there a reason that you wanted to spend 8 years of your life looking at a book like that when so much is happening in our world today and happening in your field of economics and business today?
So two things happened for me. I had written this book, Too Big to Fail, and covered the financial crisis. And people used to ask me questions about 1929, thinking that I should know the answers. And the truth is I didn't. I had this sort of vague notion, as I said, that something bad happened then. And I went on vacation, I don't know, maybe a decade ago with my wife. And I bought a bunch of books about 1929 and downloaded some on a Kindle.
You took a bunch of books about 1929 on vacation with your wife.
I figured I should try to understand what was happening during that period. And the truth was, there's some very good books that have been written, so I don't want to discount any of them. And for whatever reason, most of the book people who covered this period did it in 1940, 1950. There was sort of an armchair-like quality to these books. You know, a lot of economists writing about theories and numbers and charts and things. And I thought, you know what? I want to know who these people are. I want to know, what they're saying to each other. Who's sleeping with who? Who's trying to screw over who? What is happening here? I wanted the soap opera of what actually happened to understand their incentives and their motivations and who they really were. And you said there's all these interesting things happening today. I didn't intend to go into this project even thinking about today. But one of the things that I think I took great joy in, I don't know if it was joy, but found it fascinating, was that so many of these characters were like mirrors to today. Everything was like a mirror to today. Charlie Mitchell is running this bank, National City, which is today's Citigroup. And you could think of him as a modern day Jamie Dimon. I mean, he was on the cover of magazines for the first time back in the 20s, or you could think of him almost as a Dick Fold, who was running Lehman Brothers. John Raskob is like an Elon Musk. Carter Glass is like, almost a racist Elizabeth Warren. I mean, everybody has their sort of equal in a way. And so many of the issues were the same things, it was all the same. So I almost felt like I wasn't really writing about 1929 in a strange way. I felt like I was writing about today.
Andrew, I feel like there was a fairly simple narrative for 2008 that even people like me who are not business people or economists could sort of understand how we got to that crash. But I was looking back and thinking back to my time in school studying economics, and I still don't think I ever got a clear explanation for 1929 and the crash. Is it because there isn't one? Is it because my memory is very bad and my economics professor told me one and I've forgotten it already? Or is it just that it was a more complicated story to tell?
I think the truth is it was a remarkably complicated story. It wasn't just one thing. The 1920s were this remarkable period where we really had credit, debt, leverage in the system for the first time. People, by the way, prior to 1919, Americans thought that leverage, that taking on credit was like a moral sin. It was just something you didn't do.
It's a kind of puritanical thing that you spent what you had.
You spent what you had, and people looked down upon people who took on debt. Now, General Motors changed that because they started lending people money so people could afford to buy cars in 1919. And then Sears Roebuck figured out, okay, well, we can do that now with appliances. And then Wall Street clocked what was happening and said, okay, now we can start lending money to people so they can go buy stocks. And for a decade, it almost felt like free money. You could walk into a brokerage house on the corner of the street. By the way, they're sprouting up in New York as if they're Starbucks. And you could go in, put down $1, and they would lend you $10 against your
What's not to
$1.
like, right? I mean, what's not to like?
And as the stock market is going up, nobody wants to stop it. In 1928, the stock market went up 48%.
You write in the book that it would have taken some, I think your phrase is divine prescience, to stop the crash. Was it about not having the structures in place then, the rules and regulations that could have prevented 1929? Or was it about something else? Was it about people's just very determined desire not to see what was coming or not to believe that it could happen?
Look, I think anytime there is a moment of euphoria, it is very hard to hold that euphoria back. First of all, there were not many ways to stop it. And the group that would have needed to stop it would have been the Federal Reserve. But they were concerned about their own independence and their own political apparatus, which is to say, it was new. The Federal Reserve had only it was born in 1913. And so these people are sitting around going, okay, if we stop the speculation, we literally cut it off. It's not that we're going to be fired. I mean that the Federal Reserve will end. So there was a lot of sitting on the hands. There were also people like Andrew Mellon, who was the Treasury Secretary of the United States, who had this view of, let them be damned. Capitalism is about taking risk, and capitalism, when you lose, let them lose. So I think there was a lot of sort of different factors in play that really led to this moment.
But it seems as much as anything, the conclusion from the book, Andrew, is that this is not a book about rates and regulations,
No.
but more about human nature. And I think that's what I find so interesting in the context of today, that just this ferocious optimism of people drove them to a position where they refused to see that it could go wrong. Is that too simplistic an
No,
interpretation?
and look, I tried to write this book as a story, as a narrative about people. This was a story about people. The main character is a guy named Charlie Mitchell,
Yeah.
who was, as you described, a professional optimist. They called him Sunshine Charlie. And at every turn, he wanted to tell you that things were going to be better than they were the day before. And I don't think it was not genuine. I think he believed it, but I think he had reasons to believe it. I think he wanted to believe it. And I think there were a lot of people at that point in the cycle that needed to believe that things were going to continue to go up.
So that's also what's interesting, because if it's basically a kind of a story about humans and their intense desire to believe that things are going to get better and to take the risks then to make them better, we aren't going to change, are we? I mean, I thought that was the bit in the book about Churchill where he's been here during the crash and he goes back.
It's a great surprise for me. It's fascinating.
Incredibly interesting point that the American system was not designed to prevent crashes.
Right.
It was designed to give people the tools to withstand them or to survive. I can't remember. To survive them, to get through them. And I guess I came out of your accounting of 29 thinking, well, I don't think human nature has changed that much.
Human nature hasn't changed that
same.
much. I think we are exactly the same. And here was a lesson for me, totally counterintuitive in this regard that you're describing. To some degree, speculation, which is a dirty word in many ways, is actually the twin of innovation. Whoever was betting on Elon Musk when he was starting Tesla, and you thought it was probably crazy. I mean, everybody thought it was insane. You had to some degree, be speculating on the possibility that this guy was going to make it. And I think anytime we get into these periods of what I describe as generational speculation, I think that's happening right now with AI, invariably, sometimes that speculation boils over, if you will.
Because our instinct is to want it to boil over. Because we don't want to pull back. Because
I don't know if you remember, there was a guy named Charlie Prince who ran Citigroup in 2007. And he had this great line. He said, when the music's playing, you have to dance. And I think that's a little bit of the psychology of the investor class in America. And not just I shouldn't even say investor class, because that refers to professional investors, really the public.
I mean, it's interesting that you use Churchill and his accounting of it, because Churchill seemed to come away from that thinking this was a uniquely American thing. And actually, do you think it is? I mean, there's the old cliche about Americans are uniquely optimistic, but that sort of balance between optimism and risk and innovation, though, that seems to exist here more than in other places, and if so, why?
Well, look, I think if you look over time, you look over the last 100 years, despite how terrible things were between, say, 1930 and call it late 40s at least, for the most part, things got better and better and better and better. And yes, there were these moments. We did have a bubble that burst in 2008. We had a bubble that burst in 1999, 2000, the dot-com bubble. And there's lots of bubbles along the way. Jamie Dimon has a famous line where he talks about how his daughter had come home during the financial crisis and said, "Daddy, what's a financial crisis?" And he says, "Something that happens every 5 to 7 years." And there's some truth to that. But overall, on the whole, there has been a resilience about it.
So then the lesson might be that we shouldn't learn lessons, that we shouldn't overlearn lessons, that we shouldn't let these moments like 1929 dampen our optimism.
They shouldn't
or
dampen
make us more cautious,
maybe not
or
dampen,
make us hold back.
well, maybe not dampen the optimism, but to put some guardrails around it. I think that's the key. I think the key is to recognize that you need some semblance of speculation, that there's something good in that it's not unto itself a dirty word, but that you need those guardrails. And there are periods of time where the guardrails were lost. I think the dot-com era was part of that. I think the subprime era was part of that. I fear that we're at the beginning stages of something similar as it relates to artificial intelligence, which is to say, it is going to be a generational boom. It's an amazing thing. There are hundreds of billions of dollars going into this space. I assure you that there will be lots of failure littered throughout all of this. And yet, I imagine if we're talking to each other 10 or 20 years from now, we'll say, wow, that was a pretty amazing time.
Is it just accepting that, yes, we will go through another crash because it is almost predestined in our human nature to
I think
push
it is.
ourselves to
No,
that edge,
I think it is. And
but we will also adapt to it?
I think it's all of those things. I remember being with Tim Geithner, a former Treasury Secretary of the United States, up at Harvard University. This was after the financial crisis. And we were talking about whether too big to fail, this idea that the banks were too big and they'd always be rescued, was gone. Now, he had been in front of Congress. If you remember, all the senators used to say, we need to get rid of this idea that anything's too big to fail. And he said that was sort of a fallacy, that we're always going to have bubbles and we're always going to have these things. It's human nature. It's just a matter of how resilient we are in those moments and also how far out of control we let things go. I think that is the fundamental central question in terms of how we should even think about these things. But I think you do need to have some risk in the system. I think without risk, there'll be no innovation. And I think you can look at where the United States is relative to some other countries, and think about some of the regulations and other things that may make some of this possible.
Andrew Ross Sorkin, thank you very much.
Thank you.